guys, today's video is going to be an idea that I've kind of been like marinating in my mind for a while, and I've kind of had a list on my phone that I've sort of like added to here and there because I wasn't sure at first if I would have enough to talk about in each category. But for today's part of this video is going to be a two-parter. So for today's video, I would like to talk about eyeshadow palettes that I would have bought if I wasn't on YouTube. And then in the next video, I want to talk about eyeshadow palettes that I did buy because I'm on YouTube. Obviously, being a YouTuber, like, it depends on what kind of channel you are, but say myself, like, I definitely consider myself an eyeshadow palette review channel. That's basically what I do on my channel. I love eyeshadows, and I found that a lot of the decisions that I do make when it comes to eyeshadow palettes isn't just, do I want this palette or do I not want this palette? Like, there's a lot of things that kind of goes into my decision making. And so, like I said, for today's video, I would like to talk about the palettes that I would have bought if I wasn't on YouTube. And I do have a list on my phone here, and all of these palettes kind of have something in common. So I like to just like start off and then we'll talk about them. So the first palette on my list, these are in no particular order in when they came out, but the first palette is the Morphe and James Charles palette. Now, obviously, that was a very colorful palette, but the thing that held me back from buying that, number one, it was half neutrals, and it was also just such a big palette. Now, here's the thing, like, I don't really have anything against like big palettes per se. It's just when it comes to reviewing big palettes that I have a problem, because I just don't want to spend that much time reviewing an eyeshadow palette. And for me to be able to feel like I have a good grasp on the formula, I would like to try out at least all the shades once to be able to give like an accurate review. And I just don't want to like buy a palette and only do a first impression with it, because I can't really call it a review. Now, there are some palettes that are going to end up only having been in one video and it will be a first impression, but if I'm gonna buy a big palette, I want to really spend the time on it to really get to know that palette. And so since that palette was a half neutral palette, I just knew that if I were to review that palette, I would have to try out all of the neutral shades, obviously, and like that is just not me. But if I wasn't on YouTube, like, I could buy that palette and only use the colorful shades. Do you know what I mean? Like, then I wouldn't feel so bad about it, because it was also a pretty inexpensive palette, and I did like a lot of the color story in that palette. So it's one of those things that, like, I just couldn't be bothered, honestly. Like, that is the main reason why I just didn't end up buying that palette. Like, it definitely could have gotten a lot of views. I'm sure a lot of people were interested in that palette, but for me, I was just like, I'd rather not. And the next palette on my list is actually another Morphe palette, and this is the Pride palette. Now, the main reason I didn't buy this palette is because this palette was a limited edition palette, and I just don't really enjoy having limited edition palettes in my collection anymore since I am a YouTuber. I know a lot of people are gonna be like, oh, don't worry about it being limited edition, like, we don't care, you can still use it in videos and stuff, but like, being a YouTuber, it's like, you kind of want to take your audience into consideration as well. And I know a lot of people really appreciate that I don't use things that aren't limited edition. Of course, there's going to be like a group of each, you know, that's just always how it's going to be. But that was the main reason I didn't buy that palette, because I honestly really enjoy the color story, and I've heard a lot of people say really good things about that palette. Again, it was more on like the bigger side palette, but that palette doesn't put me off as much as the James Charles palette, because the James Charles palette was one of those stupid plastic palettes, and I just can't. I freaking hate that packaging. I used to have the, what was it, 35B before it got discontinued, and that was also one of those giant palettes, even though this one is like a 39A or B or C. Who knows what that even is called, but I just don't like the big plastic packaging. But this other Morphe palette was in a cardboard packaging, if I remember correctly, and it was very nice and sleek and kind of small for its size, so I was very tempted to buy that palette, but main reason was just it was limited edition, and I just knew that I wouldn't use that palette a lot after making a video with it. So just one of those things, being a YouTuber, you kind of have to take everything into consideration. Now, the next thing that I probably would have bought if I wasn't a YouTuber is the Pat McGrath palettes. Honestly, if I wasn't on YouTube, I probably would have bought all of those palettes, and the reason why I don't have any of them in my collection is mostly because all of the mattes and all of those palettes are just browns. I'm just not into browns with like a colorful shimmery lid, like, it's just not my kind of look. That's the reason why I didn't end up buying those, but if I could use them like off camera, which I never use anything off camera, so that's just like not even a thing because I film basically every look that I do. But if I didn't have a channel and I could use stuff off camera, I would use those palettes along with other palettes and only use the shimmers, if that makes sense. But since I would have to review them and like make looks with the color stories in the palette, which I didn't really like the whole color stories as a complete color story in any of them except for the pink and purple one, then I would have bought them because there were a lot of shades in there that I really would have liked to use, but I would have to use them along with something else to be able to get the looks out of those that I would like to. But I do really like the Pat McGrath formula. I do have her all shimmer palette, which I really do like. So yeah, it's just one of those things that if she comes out with like another mini palette that maybe has like some fun mattes, maybe I will buy it. And I'm sure a lot of you would be interested in me reviewing those anyway, so let me know if you do want me to maybe pick up some in the future, and I can definitely do so. But I would probably allow myself to like bring in some other mattes to just like spice it up a little bit. But I don't have anything against browns. I've said this so many times in the past, but I don't mind brown eyeshadow. If I can pull in some kind of other colorful matte, like I am so here for that. Like I don't mind that at all. It's just like having a brown crease just kind of makes me go you know, like it's just kind of boring to me anyway. Now here's another palette that I would have bought if I wasn't on YouTube, and this is something that I'm so happy I didn't buy, but this is the Viseart All Shimmer palette. When this one came out, I think it's called the Koi palette or something like that. I saw that online and I immediately went, ooh, I love that. That is so pretty, like so pretty. Like I absolutely adore that palette. And the reason why I didn't buy that is because it's very hard to review an all shimmer palette because number one, I don't ever do all shimmer looks, and if I were to actually try to like test out every single color in that palette, I would have to do so many looks with it, and I would also have to pull in so many other palettes in order to be able to do the looks with that palette that I wanted to do. And I just don't think that people would really be that interested in me using like one or two of the shimmers in each look and then like pulling in 50 other palettes into the video. Like it would just end up being a mess of a video. Which like it's so weird to think of like the things you do for YouTube. Like if you don't have a channel, you don't understand like the thought process that we go through. Maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just weird, and maybe I just overthink everything, but like I don't know, this is just how I think about my purchases, you know? So I just thought that that would be a really awkward palette to review, and that's the only reason why I didn't buy it, because personally, like if I do my makeup and I'm not filming, like say I'm like on vacation or something, like I always pull from different things. Usually I will bring like a bunch of single shadows and I will just have a big variation of things to work with. And I also like bringing all matte and all shimmer palettes like for the times that I do my makeup and I'm not filming it. So having an all shimmer palette would have been like a good idea if I wasn't on YouTube, but since I am on YouTube, it just doesn't make any sense for me. And so speaking of Viseart, I actually would have also bought the Viseart Brights palette, but the reason why I don't own that is just because I got into YouTube way after that one got released. Like that had been out for quite a long time, so it's not like I would have had a reason to really review that. So I don't like to pick up older palettes because I just know that I'm not going to get as much in return for like making videos on older palettes as I do making newer palettes, and that palette is also quite expensive. So it's just nice when you pick up a new release and you know you're going to get a little bit more views on those videos, and in return you're going to get a little bit more money back for the product that you do buy. So it's just kind of nice to focus mostly on the newer releases because you just get more in return for them. And also, like I was saying before, like it's really hard to review something that is an all matte and all shimmer palette because I also don't do really all matte looks ever. So it would also be one of those things where I'd be pulling from here and there, and I just don't know if people really like that. Like I like when other people do that, but I know some people don't like that. I also just wouldn't be able to use it that much because I would maybe make one video with it or maybe two, and then it would just like lay in my collection after that. Basically like every other palette that I've ever bought. Now the next palette is kind of like in the same category, I would say, because I wasn't on YouTube when this palette was released, but I do think that if I wasn't on YouTube, it would be the kind of palette that I would want to have in my collection, and this is the Jeffree Star Blood Sugar palette. I've gotten so many requests to do video with that palette, but since I don't have it, obviously I'm not going to do that, but that palette on its own is just a little bit too neutral for me. Like, don't get me wrong, I love like the bright pinks and the bright reds he has in there, but like half of that palette is basically like a neutral palette, and so I just know that I would never reach for that palette on its own, and it would also mean that I wouldn't want to make a video on its own on just that palette. So that would be a palette that would be a great companion palette in my opinion, but since I just don't do a lot of videos where I just like use what I want, as of this moment anyway, I am going to try to get better at like pulling in things here and there because I do really enjoy doing my makeup like that. So I want to kind of try to like sneakily pull things in without it like being in the title of the video and stuff. So if you guys hate that, do let me know, but I am definitely going to try to get a little bit better at just like showing people how to work with multiple things while using a palette and not just using that one palette, because it just opens up a world of possibilities, and it's something that I want other people to experience too. But that is a palette that was, number one, just a little bit too old for me to pick up after I started YouTube, and again, it was like more of a companion palette for me that I wouldn't want to make like a separate video on. Next up we have another Morphe palette. Do you see a theme here? The theme is that I kind of like big palettes, but I don't like Morphe palettes. This is the 35M. I think this is the one that Betty Jean talks about all the time that she absolutely loves. I think this palette has a beautiful color story, and it's just such a big palette. Like, I just cannot be bothered to review a big palette. I just don't want to do 10 looks with like a Morphe palette. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the amount of looks I feel like I would have to do in order to be able to get a good grasp of the formula. And I don't really even like Morphe formula so much. But that palette just has a beautiful color story, and it really annoys me because I feel like if I didn't have a channel, maybe I would like pull for that here and there and like use along with other things, but like as a palette to review, no thank you. I just don't want to deal with it. Here's another one. This is kind of petty, but this is the Gingerbread palette by Too Faced, and the only reason why I would have bought this was just because it's so cute and it smells like gingerbread. And I sort of like the color story. It's not really me, obviously, you guys know. It's a little on the neutral side, but I do think if I had it and I didn't have a channel, I would use it sometimes along with other things, but mostly I would just want it for like just using one color here and there along with like other palettes. But I just know that I wouldn't want to like be excited to make a video with that palette, and I also know that if I bought it, I probably would never reach for it, you know? It's just one of those things, like, I'm starting to know myself by now that if I need to talk myself into buying a palette, I just shouldn't buy it. Like, if I don't do a double take when I see something being released, that palette is just not for me. But speaking of like doing a double take, the next palettes are actually some palettes that I really like the look of, and if they weren't so big, I would have bought them. And that is all of the Norvina palettes. The reason I didn't buy these palettes is simply because the first one came out and I thought that the color story was okay, but it wasn't my favorite, you know what I mean? And then after a little while, like a week, the second one came out and I was like, oh, you know what? That is a beautiful palette. And then I feel like by the time that one was even out, like the third one had come out, and I was like, I'm not going to review number 2 if number 3 is already out, because at that point, no one's even going to care about number 2 anymore. Like, they just came out so close together that it just kind of messed everything up for me. Like, I didn't want to have that pressure on me to review something so quickly because I didn't know if number 4 was going to come out, you know? And again, like, those palettes were so big, and it would have been the kind of palettes that I would have had to do so many looks with. And knowing after the second one came out that I probably wouldn't even have had time to make 10 looks with that until the third one came out, and then everybody would be begging me to do that with number 3. I can't even imagine like how stressed out I would have been if I ended up on the Norvina bandwagon, because I would have felt so pressured to like do a bunch of looks with all of those palettes. And so I'm just happy I didn't want to buy them. I think that was more of like, I just don't want to put in the work to review those palettes. And yeah, that's basically why I don't end up buying big palettes ever, because I feel bad making first impression videos on like large palettes and not doing a follow-up on them, just because like I know a lot of people want to know like how exactly do they perform, and you just don't get a good idea of how something performs when you only use it once or twice and you use like 5 out of 30 shades, you know, like that's just not enough to give a proper review. And since I am a palette review channel, I review a lot of things, I get a lot of things into my collection, and I just can't push everything else to the side because I get one new palette that I want to focus on, because then I just get so backed up that by the time I get around to like filming with the newer stuff or the new things that have come into my collection, like it's just too late, you know? So you kind of have to give and take a little bit as a review channel, and it's just kind of how it is, and I've kind of just accepted that. So I'm just going to keep being picky with the palettes that I do buy now. I'm probably going to buy all of the Jeffree Star palettes still because they do get me a lot of views. And I also think it's kind of nice that they bring in a lot of new people to my channel, in which I can start introducing them to like indie brands, which I think is awesome. So I kind of use Jeffree Star in a way for me to get people over to the dark side, you know, does that make sense? Like, I think that's a good way to do it. So let me know if you found this interesting, and I'm definitely going to do another video talking about the palettes that I bought just because I'm on YouTube, and some of those might come as a surprise to you, maybe not, I don't know, maybe. we're just gonna have to see. Like, I am excited. I think this is kind of fun to talk about, and I would love it if you have a channel to maybe do something similar if you think in the same kind of terms as I do. Maybe you don't at all and you just buy what you want whenever you want. I don't know. Maybe it's just me having kind of like rules for myself on what to buy just because I'm on YouTube. Could just be me. Like I said, let me know if you like this video. If you want to see some other chatty videos that I've done, you can click on one of these, and if you're new to my channel, I would love it if you would consider subscribing. I'll see you in my next one. Bye.